Some years ago, me and my friends went for a drive into a disused quarry and now national park here in the UK. We spent a fair amount of time there throughout our teenage years. Being the teenagers we were, we would find ways of entertaining ourselves, sometimes at the expense of others. By the way, nothing too sinister, but being your usual kids that had nothing more to do. One of our favorite pastimes would be to turn off our headlights and park up discreetly so no other cars could see us. A lot of people would park up there and smoke weed out of sight of the police. We would hide the car in the dark, and once we saw someone pull up to have a quiet smoke, we pretend to be the police. Example, flash a blue light and play a siren as loud as possible on our sub. We found it funny, okay? Obviously this would result in the people in the car panicking and try to hide their weed or drive off as fast as possible. Funnily enough, we ended up making several friends from doing this once they realized it was a joke. Over the years, pretty much every night that we were up there, we would see a motorhome parked up in the same spot. We never paid them any mind because you could never see inside, and it always seemed dormant and dark. The motorhome was clearly a very dated model and pretty dirty. The only thing other than it looking slightly out of place was that it had the biggest antenna on the top. Like I've never seen one so big. One night it was extremely quiet up in the quarry, and we were about to go home because there wasn't really anything to do, or should I say, no one to terrorize. One of our friends then asked why he hadn't given any grief to the people in the motorhome. We explained the above. It never seemed like there was anyone home. After some time, we decided that we'd bang on the doors and try to shake the vehicle and scream, "Earthquake!" Again, please bear in mind, we were very bored, stupid teenagers. All four of us got out of the car as quietly as we could and sneaked all around the dirty motorhome. We counted to 3, trying to hide our giggles, and began our plan. We shook and banged and shouted "Earthquake" at the top of our lungs. After about 30 seconds, no response. We all looked at one another. There was clearly no one home, and it felt completely anticlimactic. We began to walk back to the car, which wasn't too much of a distance away, when the motorhome door opened at a pretty relaxed pace. We all heard the creak of the door and spun around to see what it was. We all stood, frozen at what we were seeing. People began to pile out of the motorhome, not quickly and not slowly, but something like nothing had happened. That was strange enough, but the part that made our blood turn cold was the fact they were all wearing masks. Black masks. They were covered in matching black cloaks, and there must have been around 8 to 9 of them. It's safe to say we booked it. We ran like we never ran before, straight back to the car and jumped in, starting up the engine and speeding off out of the quarry. 3 of us looked back to see if they were following, and they weren't. They were just standing there, looking in our direction. The door to the motorhome was still open, and we could see that it was lit by candlelight and candlelight alone. No wonder we could never see any light coming from the windows at night. Obviously, there could have been an explanation for this, like maybe they were playing a trick on us because we used to play tricks on everyone else on the car park. But either way, it was fucking terrifying.
Your friendly neighborhood cult members. I lived in a very quiet rural town when I was younger. There was only one stoplight, a Safeway, and one gas station with a little mom and pop shops in between. I lived 35 minutes out of town, on a street with only 5 other people on it. All on good walking distance away from each other, meaning you couldn't see your neighbors out of the window. I was only 10 or 12 at that time, and my older brother, who had received his license, recently wanted any excuse to take the car out, and me, being an annoying little sister, always begged to tag along. I can't remember what we had gone out for, but it was around 11:30 at night, and we had just turned on a long winding street. I lived in a PNY, so the pine trees towered over you and can sometimes give you the feeling of being enclosed. And it was a particularly foggy night, so visibility was limited. I was looking towards my brother from the passenger seat, not paying attention to the road, and all of a sudden, my brother slams on his brakes hard enough. I nearly hit the dashboard. I had my mouth open, about to yell at him, when I see his face, petrified with an expression I couldn't pinpoint. His lips were pinched together, nostrils flaring, and I could hear his breathing. His eyes wide open and locked on like a missile on his target. I finally allowed my eyes to follow his gaze. In the middle of the street, low fog on the road, were two individuals in black robes, with the hoods on. These robes were the real thing, just like Grim Reaper's. Wider at the opening of the sleeves, and a hood completely covered their faces, so we couldn't see anything. We sat there for what felt like forever, just staring at them in our headlights. And then they start to walk towards us. At this point, my scared shitless little self had both hands on my brother, shaking his arm violently, back and forth screaming, "Lock the doors! Lock the doors! Lock the doors!" He cries out, I am! He pressing the lock button, we hear a resounding sound. These people were crawling towards the car, though in perfect sync, stepping slowly at the same time. We watched them as they made their way to the front of the car, and then made a slight turn, so they began walking by the driver's side. My brother and I were stuck in fear, just staring as they walked past us and disappeared into the dark in a rearview mirror. We sped home and freaked out, telling our dad everything, and then called the cops who reported multiple sightings of these two, and then they instructed us not to confront them. We never heard or saw anything about them again. But creepy cult members? I hope we never meet again.
I'm still trying to fathom everything myself, so bear with me. It all started when Mark rummaged through my things when I was at work one day. Found my sage. By the way, I was raised Wiccan, and used it to, quote unquote, clear the house of bad energy, which would have been fine had he asked me. A while later, when I was at home, he was erratic and highly upset because there was, quote unquote, something else in the house. My discomfort started when Mark called me when I was headed back home from work the night of the incident. He said we need to talk when I got home, but wouldn't tell what about. When I got there, he met me at my car and said one of my books had to go. The book in question is a children's scary story book I've had since I was little. I said I could put it in my car, but I wasn't throwing it out because it's my book. He refused to let me enter the house first. Told me he was about to seem like a madman, and proceeded to walk about the front 2 rooms screaming, "Only creatures of God are allowed here," or something of that nature. What he bellowed was the most aggressive, terrifying yells I've ever heard from a man. At that point, I was afraid enough to unsheath my knife and hold it in my pocket. Mark beat me to my room, Andrew right behind me. Mark rifled through my top books and revealed the scary storybook and the book on Norwegian folk tales I got at Disney years prior. He picked it up and declared that the scary storybook was, quote unquote, it. He said the book was, quote-unquote opening a portal to demons, or something like that. He then told Andrew they had to call Madre, their spiritual leader, and I asked if they could do that outside my room. I closed and locked the door and fed my lizard to try to calm myself down. They had her on speakerphone right outside my door, and I could hear everything. She told them the book was leather with white lettering. None of my books are leather. She was doing a cold reading and pulling all that out of her ass. They told her there were two with a white cover. The one with the molded faces and the one with a lady on it. She told them to get rid of both of them. Those are my books, my personal property. Madre asked if they had supplies. Andrew confirmed it, as he was holding a bag of something and a candle. Madre then told them not to tell them that they had to do it in my room. That's when I had enough and texted my mom. This is what I texted her. Mark is religious but more spiritual. There's this lady that he and his friends hail as their spiritual leader, Madre. He's got insane ideals and views of the universe. He feels Wicca is evil, and as are readings and tarot cards. Madre called him and said that they had to get rid of two of my books. They brought candles, and Madre said on the phone to not let me know what they need to do in my room. By the way, Madre commands their beliefs and forbids certain behaviors from Mark, such as buying antiques. My mom called the police. At the time, and still now, she feels they were going to burn my children's books and then do something to me. I begged her several times not to, but she did anyway. In her defense, she thought I was going to be hurt by two men she didn't know. A policeman showed up. I was still in my room, and Andrew told him I wasn't there, so the cop left. A second time, a policeman arrived. Again, was told I wasn't there, and he left. Later on, I heard Andrew exclaimed, "We're being swatted." There were cop cars surrounding the house. The third time, it was 3 officers who demanded to know where I was. I exited the room, knife still in my pocket, out of fear, which they took. The cops said they were going to question me outside, but they didn't and kept me with Mark and Andrew. I was shaking and crying, but the cops took my saying we were fine as truth and headed out. That's when my dad showed up. The police, my dad, and I were outside. I told my dad the story, and the cops stayed to listen. The police then told me I needed to grab what was important, because they didn't feel I would be safe there, and my dad agreed. I didn't want the cops to come. I just wanted my mom's advice as to what to do in a situation that made me feel extremely uncomfortable and unsafe. I felt physically unsafe, as well as having a concern that Mark was going through my personal belongings prepared to destroy some of them. The religious beliefs would be fine if they didn't involve me. I'm now moved into my grandmother's house.
My experience with the Church of Scientology. This happened when I was around 17 years old, and is still happening now. At 17, I felt lost in the world and stuck in a job I disliked, with work colleagues that didn't like me. This had to do with my accent, as I was quite well spoken, so they thought I was a rich kid. It all started on a Friday after work. The factory I worked in had half a day on Fridays, so I would work just spend the rest of the day wandering around in the city I lived in. It had been a tough day of the relentless mucking, and I was reaching my breaking point. And I went looking around in the city, looking for a new job. I visited the police recruitment center, the army, navy and air force centers, and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to get away from it all. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets and still no idea what to do with my life. I turned the corner and immediately saw a sign sitting in front of me. I can remember it so vividly now. It said, "Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in." I then looked up at the building, and a big fancy sign outside it said, "The Church of Scientology." Now before I continue, yes, I already knew about Scientology. However, I had a morbid curiosity about it. I had heard all the horror stories and going on inside the church. But Tom Cruise was my favorite actor, and he seemed to have his life sorted out pretty good. My famous last words right there. So I went inside. I was immediately greeted by a very nice lady. She asked me how I was doing and what she could do for me today. I asked if I could speak with somebody about the church and a personality test. She smiled and said, "I would be happy to. Please take a seat and I will get you someone to speak to." After a minute, I was introduced to an old man named Alan, and he was the head of my city's Scientology center. Alan took me to a small room to talk privately. When we entered, I immediately noticed a large picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down and generally had a nice talk. I told him about how I wasn't happy about where my life was going. I told him about how I wanted to leave, plus all the trouble I was having at work. He seemed genuinely concerned for me, and I felt like he wanted to help. After a while of talking, I agreed to do the personality test. He gave me the test and left the room, saying to give the test to the receptionist after I finished. 2 hours later, I finished it. No joking, that's really how long it took. It was around 500 questions about anything and everything. I handed it to the receptionist, and she told me it would take some time to process. In the meantime, Alan had told her to take me to the private cinema and show me a film. I thought it was going to be some old room in the back with a TV on the wall, but no. They did indeed have a private cinema. It could seat around 50 people and had a large screen in front. I did feel a bit weird just being by myself in a cinema, owned by Scientology, but I bet that hasn't happened to many people. Or maybe it has. Anyway, I sat down and they played me the film. It was about 30 minutes long and consisted of a narrator explaining those strange feelings you sometimes get, with some mediocre acting following along. I remember a section about how much you doubt yourself, knowing you have locked the door but going back to check multiple times. At one point, the film showed how a past event that happened to a mother while she was pregnant with you could affect your life in a negative way. Example, your mother was sick in a flight, so you are scared of flying. I also vaguely remember something about rotten eggs and how much an event involving them can hurt you. I know it sounds absurd, but in some ways the film really made sense to me. When the film was done, I was taken to Alan's office and he told me my results. He told me I was extremely depressed, one of the most emotive people he had ever met, lacking cognitive thinking, and I was a waste of talent. Now, this made me very upset, but Alan said he could help me. He gave me about 4 books and a DVD. He told me to read the books and watch the film before my course. I asked, "What course?" And Alan told me he had signed me up for a course at the center. He convinced me that if I didn't do this course, that my life would soon spiral out of control. He made me hand over quite a lot of money for the course and said I would receive an email about the course, which was in a month's time. I left the center, ran home, and immediately started reading the books I was given. This happened all over the weekend. I basically locked myself in my room and did nothing but read and reread those books and watch the DVD over and over again. Over the weekend, I began taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan with questions and concerns. I started resenting my mother for my life, began to think she was the problem. But everything bad that happened to me was the result of her. I started to treat her badly, swearing at her, did the best I could to ignore her. When I emailed Alan about my mother, he told me that if she was the catalyst of my problems, then maybe I should consider disconnecting from her. But I took that bullshit seriously. I made plans to leave her out of my life. A week before my course, I developed some kind of God complex towards everyone around me. What I read in those books told me what I could become. I saw everyone in my family as below me. I really became a truly spiteful person. Just days before my course, I was confronted by my mother and father. They said they were concerned about me, and they searched my room. My dad took all of my Scientology books and the DVD. I was outraged. I screamed and cursed at my parents. I said horrible, wicked things to them. I told them how I was going to leave them and how I never wanted to see them again. Hours of arguing, back and forth, tears and crying. However, in the end, they did convince me that the church was a bad place. They said, if I was so miserable at work, I should have told them. And that is true. To this day, I can't believe I didn't say anything to them. Instead, I went to the Scientology. That night after the arguing had stopped, they sat me down and comforted me. I really couldn't believe it. After the way I had treated them for the past 3 weeks, they still cared for me. The next day I emailed Alan and told him I would not be coming back to the church. He quickly got back to asking me why, asking if it was my family and if I was being forced not to go. However, I ignored him. The emails I revived in the next few weeks were mad. He told me stuff like I should leave my family now and I could stay at the church. He tried to convince me that it was all because of my mother. He even emailed me to say something along the lines of he won't be surprised if he reads in the papers that I was found dead by suicide. I'm very sure he crossed a line there, but I just kept ignoring him. The strangest email I got was one in binary code. 0011011011. This and 100010101110. That! I used a binary code translator, but it all came back as mixed up letters and numbers. None of it made any sense. I eventually blocked him. It still hasn't stopped. About 2 or 3 times a year, I will get an email from the church. It's either asking how I am, or asking about my family. When I get them, I immediately block the email address. But they just keep coming. It's always someone new, saying they heard about my case, and they are worried about me. The whole reason I'm writing this is because I just got one the other day, and I thought it would make a good warning. Please, I beg of you, do not go to the Church of Scientology Center. If they can make me into a spiteful degenerate in a few hours, then what can they do with a person in a few months or a year? If anyone has an idea how to block an entire religion, cult from my email, then please let me know. And if you're lost in life, sad or upset, then please Please talk to your family, friends, or a doctor. When you are down, don't let others make you into a monster. Take it from me. After this event, I got help and I'm happy, confident person now. Thank you so much for reading, and have a great day. Oh, and Alan, if you're reading this, you made me into a monster, so for your sake, let's not meet again.